Alright guys, welcome back to F1 News. Carlos Sainz takes a stunning pole position for Ferrari in front of the Tifosi at the Italian Grand Prix, but the big drama was around the investigation ongoing for both Ferrari drivers during the qualifying session itself for potentially driving unnecessarily slowly. As soon as Sainz gets the pole, that investigation is dropped. Some drivers, understandably maybe, think this is rather a little bit suspicious. Maybe there should have been some punishment for the potential infringement, as does similarly George Russell. Very much intrigued to your perspective in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy, subscribe if you're new as always. Now first of all, there was an update today that potentially Monza and Imola beyond 2025 will not both be on the calendar. There might be 3-4 races in the US, but apparently 2 races in Italy is too much. And look, you've got to keep Monza, haven't you, surely? But still, that's an update on the day, and potentially there'll be a decision soon on whether Italy will retain 2 races. There was also this, because Formula 2 was going on today, that one of the very promising Mercedes Junior drivers, Kimi Antonelli, will straight up skip Formula 3 and go straight into Formula 2 next season. This got a lot of traction because he seems like a very promising driver. I guess big question as to what they do if he's really, really good. And, you know, obviously Hamilton and Russell aren't going anywhere from their main team anytime soon. Mick Schumacher will want a seat as well. They even confirmed this Mercedes at the factory last night on the grind until about midnight, trying to figure out what was wrong with their car on the Friday. And they made some progress, enough to have a very decent qualifying for George Russell especially, and we'll get into that. But this is where the drama of the day began. So around Monza, historically, there's been all sorts of issues with traffic, right? And you guys will notice if you watch any of the Grand Prix over the last couple of years, mainly because drivers, they want a bit of a slipstream down the straight, so they really slow down going before they go around the parabolica just to try and get in the best possible position, and it's been an absolute shambles over so many years. This year again especially. So today, before FP3, the stewards and race director imposed a minimum lap time of a 1 minute 41 seconds, so typically a lap's 1:20 or so. They said, alright, you can go 20 seconds slower than that during your out lap or in lap, and just to ensure that we keep the pace moving a little bit, to stop these drivers going unnecessarily slowly. And they did say that any infringements here will be investigated, i.e. you go over that 1 minute 41, you know, it could be a 5-place grid drop, I think was what people were kind of expecting for such a violation. Includes outlaps and in-laps. So we'll definitely get back to what that means in a second. Also a difficult day for Checo Perez. I know that this won't really... well, it will add fuel to the fire of those that believe there's some sort of conspiracy at Red Bull, right? Because Perez was actually really on pace with Verstappen all weekends, and then in his final practice session, he has an engine leak, so it kind of compromises the end of his practice, and they have to put an old engine in the car. And if there's one track where putting a new engine in, or like, let's say an old used engine in, is going to cost you some performance, it's probably around here at Monza. And this is why Ferrari replaced literally like every component to their car before this weekend. Brand new engine, brand new turbo, brand new, like absolutely everything's new in those Ferraris, because they need absolute maximum pace, and that's what they tried to achieve this weekend, and it worked out for them today. Whether it will matter tomorrow is another question. FP3 ended with Sainz, Verstappen, and Hamilton. Sainz had the measure of Leclerc all weekends, and very impressively so. So the Red Bull guys did a great job of managing to fit a new engine into Perez's car between practice and the start of qualifying, but well, not a new engine, right? A used engine, one that was already in the pool, so no penalties or anything, but still not ideal for Perez at all. So qualifying begins. This again was the hard, medium, soft situation. It does really create interesting dynamics because you usually use 2 sets of the tyres, but it's like how you warm up the hard tyre is very different to how you warm up the soft tyre, or even the mediums at that. So, you know, the way you treat your outlaps, your in-laps, your preparation, like, is very different, and it really does mix things up. And, I mean, this Q1 was absolutely insane, to be honest. Like, cars are all over the shop here. I mean, look at what this looks like on the left-hand side. Albon at this point was P1, with Russell just behind. I mean, it was an absolute mess. Now, to be honest, it was mainly a mess for Alpine. They had a disaster. Pretty sure Ocon nearly took out Norris as well. So, you know, he was... well, both of them were out, basically, in Q1. Even Stroll was last, which was frankly embarrassing. Zhou and Magnussen were out as well. And, you know, so session done for them. But this immediately was where this was noted, that an incident involving both Ferraris, which immediately makes you think, Ferrari have messed up something again, right? Do you know what I mean? If it's one of the Ferraris, or if it's like a Ferrari and another car, you think, all right, whatever. But when it's both Ferraris, the immediate implication is Ferrari messed something up here. And that might be the case. Whether they should have received a penalty, that's another question. We'll get into that in a second. So they were, well, noted for failing to follow race director's instructions regarding the maximum lap time permitted. And this is what it looked like on race control, that they had exceeded those times. And I think a lot of people thought when they saw this, it's similar in a way to, you know, let's say you speed into the pit lane, you get a penalty, you get a fine, that's how it works. Like, it's kind of a done deal. Doesn't matter if you come into the pit lane during a race at 80.1 kph, you're getting a 5-second penalty for that. Those are the rules, that's how they're enforced. So I think a lot of people saw this and expected, oh, well, you know, here we go, 5-place grid penalty or something for both Ferraris. And that might be what people expected. So immediately I was like, oh, you know, well done Verstappen, another pole position. Maybe Albon could challenge him, right? Who knows? Because the Williams was looking particularly racy. But and these were the numbers, right? So this is Leclerc and Sainz on their outlap. So this outlap they did like a 142, 143 respectively, and then they did their hot lap on, I guess, the hard tires or whatever it was at this point. Then they did you know, another hot lap, and then they came in again. And during these kind of outlaps and in-laps, and also all the other laps, you can see that, let's say Sainz 157, 157, 158, 150 or whatever, right? Like a lot of these laps were way below the 142 threshold, or 141 threshold, sorry, that there supposedly was in place. Now, I imagine the 141 was, it seems a little bit more like a bit of a guidance time, you know what I mean? It didn't seem like, all right, if you're 141.001, you know, your 5-second penalty, and a 140.999 is fine. Like, I think that there was designed to be a little bit of leeway here. But when you see them doing laps of like, you know, 155s, 158s, 157s, when it's way slower than what they're meant to be doing, just to try and ensure that things keep moving when there's 20 cars on track, I think people expected a bit of a penalty to go on here. So, and it sounds like, based on Zhou's onboards, that towards the end of the lap, Sainz and Leclerc were kind of told, oh, we've got to get a move on with this. So it made it seem like Ferrari messed up pretty big time. And there was talk about whether they could just like delete those relative laps, but if they had done, I don't know where they would have been in terms of qualifying position at the time. So, you know, apparently even the other laps had also slow out laps. So not looking good at this point for Ferrari at all. So I think that part of the Tifosi, at least maybe in the stands, they didn't really realise, but certainly watching from home, we're thinking, well, you know, like, do as good as you can. But I think a lot of people expected some sort of penalty to come their way. So Q2 happens. Both AlphaTauri's looking pretty good. Lawson as well got into Q2 here, which is a very impressive job from him. Sargent as well, I gotta say, like, the fact that Sargent was P15 doesn't look good for him, because the Albon Williams was very good, as we expected around this circuit in Monza. And I think this weekend's Sargent really needs to get a point, you know what I mean? Like, he really needs to get something on the board this time, because I think Albon will. And Sargent qualifying P15 just doesn't help his chances of getting a point that would at least show that he's got something in the tank. So, yeah, that discrepancy is not ideal. But it's really tight here, apart from the top three. And that remains the case as time progresses. Now, Ferrari were at this point saying, you know what, I think we're okay, right? And I know that a lot of fans are saying this thinking, well, you know, Ferrari thinking it's far from guaranteed that it's actually true. And also it did bring up for Hamilton making Q3 with a great lap, 300 Q3 appearances. I think he's done 324 Grand Prix, so yeah, remarkable stat really. 300 Q3 appearances is an absolutely crazy record. But Q3 didn't really go his way relative to Russell. So after the first laps, it looked like this, and it was Sainz Leclerc, P1, P2. Verstappen had a bit of a moment, actually, coming out of the second chicane. But even then, Perez was still 3/10 off the pace. So maybe part of that is the older engine, but, you know, again, Perez just can't get anywhere near Max at the moment. And the conclusion to qualifying was fantastic, because Leclerc went out first, so he had no slipstream at all. The slipstream is a relevant factor, but when the car in front is like 2, 3, 4, 5 seconds down the road, it doesn't really give you that much advantage. There is something to be gained from having like the slight slipstream, but there's also something to be lost in the corners. And when you look at the sector times, Leclerc actually had the fastest sector 1 and had a slower sector 2. So, you know, that's not what you'd expect if the slipstream was actually particularly valuable. But anyway, Leclerc comes over the line, goes provisional pole, then Verstappen pips him to it by about 0.5 of a second, and then Sainz comes through with a monster middle sector to snatch it right back. So This is fantastic. I'm sure that Tifosi would have liked to have a 1-2 because there's always a chance that Verstappen goes down the inside and leads into turn 1. But I'm sure Verstappen will play it slow tomorrow because they know Verstappen knows that they've got the fastest car. But the Ferrari is the fastest car in a straight line here. So, because they've got their engine absolutely maxed out and they've got lower downforce than Red Bull have. So maybe there's a chance. If Leclerc can get Verstappen and lead, if it's a Ferrari 1-2, I think they have a chance. If it's not a Ferrari 1-2, I think Verstappen will at some point probably breeze past. Russell did a really good lap. I was very impressed by, because that Mercedes looked a bit shaky, to be honest. So Russell got P4 ahead of Perez. Perez just ahead of Albon, then Piastri, then Hamilton went P8 in the end. Super fine margins here, right? Like he was only just over a tenth of Russell, but that was the difference between 4th and 8th, Norris and then Alonso rounding out the top 10. But people were still thinking as soon as this happened, well, is Verstappen still on pole, Well done, Sainz, but is a penalty going to be incoming? And then it was revealed immediately after, which, I think people thought was a bit suspect, right? That as soon as he got pole, they were like, yep, no issues. Now, the reason why people are thinking about this is mainly because it's a Ferrari pole in Monza. And, you got to wonder if this had been a Ferrari pole at Silverstone, would it have been treated differently? And that's a question people will consider and people will raise. Now, the stewards have explained this and said both drivers stayed at or above the required speed to stay under 141 in the vast majority of the circuit. But in certain cases, this is what Fred Vasseur said as well, actually, after the session, that he was like, look, we told them to slow down so they wouldn't impede other drivers, and that took them below the 141 mark, or like above the 141 mark, I suppose, as it were. So the stewards determined they weren't actually driving unnecessarily slowly, but and therefore it was okay. So despite the fact that they breached the number, they weren't really driving unnecessarily slowly. They were slower because they got out of the way of certain drivers in certain instances. But it's still interesting that it was both the Ferrari guys that were at fault for this, apparently, and apparently nobody else was even called into question as an investigation. So it does raise the question. This is what George Russell said, I'm guessing chatting with Carlos Sainz after the race about, sounds a bit convenient, right? Home race sounds convenient. Obviously, I'm kidding, no idea what it's for. But still, no further action is nonetheless interesting when it's at that Grand Prix. And people will wonder, have the stewards been a little bit lenient here, right? Because the thing is that we didn't know with this new rule brought in at the start of the day what the punishment would be for breaching it. Like, it wasn't made clear. If you do this, you get this penalty. It wasn't explained. So therefore, it's kind of unclear whether they have, because if there's been a breach of a regulation and there's been no penalty, people are like, well, this is inconsistent stewarding. And maybe it is, but I think that, to be honest, the explanation the stewards come out with seems reasonable enough. It just, as George Russell says, it just seems awfully convenient, doesn't it? That given the circumstances, Ferrari effectively got away with it. But I'm happy they did, right? I mean, we get a different pole sitter to Max. It's been plenty of poles for Max this season, couple for Perez, one for Leclerc, one for Hamilton back at Budapest, and now one for Sainz. And this was the pole lap. Verstappen was actually a 10th up on Sainz in the final sector, mainly, I think, through Ascari. And as you can see, Leclerc was purple sector 1, a 10th down in sector 2. So if the slipstream was what was hurting Leclerc, the numbers don't really play that out, to be honest. But still, I mean, incredibly close, right? 700, across the top 3 drivers, and then 7/10 across the top 9. So not a bad day of qualifying at all. But it's Carlos Sainz, incredible performance from him, that leads them away tomorrow after all the investigations came to a conclusion. Can Ferrari possibly do it? The long run pace looks somewhat promising based on FP2 and FP3. The Red Bull will still be the fastest car, I'm sure. They probably will need some help from, either technical issues or something for Max if they want to win tomorrow. But, Sainz and Leclerc will try their best. And if they can get into a position where they're 1-2, they might be able to hold Max up because, with DRS behind the other car and the Ferrari being really quick in the straight line this weekend, there is a chance. It's not out of the realms of possibility. But very much intrigued to hear your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care. And I'll see you next time.